On a sunny April afternoon, the school bell rang and kids poured out, excited to head home. Among them was 8-year-old Tori Stafford, her bright smile lighting up as she walked toward her older brother, just like any other day. But as she made her way through the crowd, a woman approached her, someone who seemed friendly and safe. After a quick chat, Tori took the woman's hand, trusting her without a second thought, and walked over to a nearby car. In that small, ordinary moment, everything changed. The town of Woodstock, Ontario, was about to be shaken by a mystery that would turn Tori's world upside down. Her family and friends couldn't have imagined what was really happening that day, or the dark truths that would slowly come to light. Victoria Stafford, more commonly known as Tori Stafford, was born on July 15, 2000, in the town of Woodstock, Canada. She was the second child in her family, born to Rodney Stafford and Tara McDonald, who had previously welcomed their first child, a boy named Darren Stafford. Tori's family life was marked by significant difficulties, largely due to the complex and troubled relationship between her parents. This tension led to their separation in 2002. It was reported that both Rodney and Tara struggled with substance abuse, but while Rodney managed to enroll in a detox program, Tara did not follow the same path. Following the separation, Tori and her brother Darren stayed with their mother. Despite the less-than-ideal circumstances of her home life, Tori was a vibrant and affectionate little girl, known for her warm smile, sparkling eyes, and chestnut hair. She enjoyed the simple joys of childhood, like playing with her friends and attending school. She also loved going to the movies and watching performances related to ballet, dance, and acting. Tori's compassion extended to animals, with a particular love for dogs. She frequently begged her mother for a puppy, and although Tara's financial situation was tight, she was actively trying to find a way to bring a dog into their lives that would suit a home with 2 young children. By the time Tori turned 8, she was attending a public school in her town. On April 8, 2009, Tori set off for school around 7:45 in the morning, as she usually did, accompanied by her brother Darren. They planned to meet after classes to walk home together, a habit they shared regularly. The siblings were deeply bonded, and their strong relationship helped them cope with their challenging family situation. Though Tori was lively and outgoing, Darren was more reserved. She often encouraged him to enjoy typical childhood activities, helping him stave off the sadness that their circumstances occasionally brought. As the school day ended around 3:30 p.m., Darren waited outside the school building for Tori, intending to go home with her. However, his friends asked him to join them briefly, and he agreed, assuming it would only take a few minutes. When he returned to their usual meeting spot, he found that Tori was gone. Thinking she might have decided to go home alone, he headed back, only to discover she wasn't there. Worried, he told Tara, who tried to reassure him, suggesting that Tori was likely with her friends. But Darren remained unsettled. He quickly took his bicycle and began searching the neighborhood, checking with neighbors and searching nearby streets. While Darren was searching, Tara decided to call her mother to ask if Tori was with her, but she wasn't. Growing concerned, Tori's grandmother contacted the police around 6 p.m., reporting her granddaughter's absence. Officers arrived promptly at Tara's home and started asking questions, noting Tara's delayed reaction to alerting the authorities, which they found unusual. Learning of Tara's struggles with substance abuse and her unemployment, investigators placed her high on the list of individuals potentially involved in Tori's disappearance. Meanwhile, the search for Tori intensified. News of her absence quickly reached Rodney, who immediately joined the efforts to locate his daughter. The community rallied, with neighbors and friends helping to distribute posters of Tori across the area. The school even closed temporarily to allow teachers and staff to join the search. Posters featuring Tori's face appeared on almost every corner, and search parties combed through Woodstock, asking anyone they encountered if they had seen her. Despite the widespread effort, no clues emerged as to her whereabouts. Determined to uncover any leads, investigators decided to check the footage from security cameras located around the school. To their surprise, they found clear footage of Tori leaving the school at 3:30 p.m. She was seen talking to a woman and showed no signs of fear or hesitation, suggesting familiarity. The woman took Tori's hand and together they walked toward a vehicle parked nearby. The police immediately released this footage to local media in hopes of identifying the woman, who appeared to have physical similarities to Tara. Rodney, visibly shaken, appeared in interviews on multiple media outlets, showing deep concern for his daughter's safety, a demeanor that sharply contrasted with Tara's stoic response. The public quickly noticed this contrast, with many expressing suspicion toward Tara. In response to mounting criticism, she agreed to an interview, during which she expressed sadness and frustration, stating that people were focusing on baseless rumors instead of the search for Tori. Rodney, despite their differences, supported Tara's statement, emphasizing their shared hope for Tori's safe return. As the footage circulated, the public became more involved in the search, while Tara viewed the clips multiple times, feeling a strange familiarity with the woman. Finally, on April 12, 2009, Tara contacted the police, claiming she had recognized the woman from the footage. According to her, the woman was Terry Lynn McClintock, an 18-year-old who had once been her neighbor. Whether Tara genuinely recognized her or received information from others in her circle remains unclear, but her identification proved to be a significant breakthrough in the case. Terry Lynn McClintock, a troubled young woman with a complex past, had crossed paths with Tara, Tori Stafford's mother, on multiple occasions. According to some accounts, she occasionally procured oxycodone for Tara, and in a few instances the two had brief conversations about raising dogs, with Tara sharing how Tori longed to have one as a pet. Although Tara confirmed that there was no close relationship between her and Terry Lynn, she acknowledged that Terry was aware of Tori's strong desire to have a dog. Terry Lynn's childhood was marred by hardship, shaped by parental neglect and abuse. She was ultimately raised by her adoptive mother, who worked in local nightclubs. These early life challenges deeply affected Terry Lynn, and by adolescence, she exhibited violent behaviors, engaging in various altercations, including an attack on her adoptive mother and some local youths. In 2007, she escalated her criminal behavior by committing an armed robbery, injuring a man who resisted. Following this incident, Terry Lynn was detained at a juvenile center, where she reportedly wrote disturbing letters expressing her desire to inflict pain and suffering on others. Though her psychological issues were noted at the time, she was eventually released back into the community. With this background, law enforcement swiftly brought Terry Lynn in for questioning when they identified her as a suspect in Tori's disappearance. Despite extensive interrogations, Terry Lynn insisted on her innocence. By April 13th, the local police handed over the missing person investigation to the Ontario Provincial Police, officially reclassifying it as a kidnapping case. Determined to uncover the truth, the new investigative team monitored Terry Lynn's calls and visits closely, soon noticing her frequent interactions with Michael Rafferty, a 28-year-old man she claimed as her boyfriend. Michael, however, described their relationship as strictly platonic, though he regularly visited her. Born on December 28, 1980 in Woodstock, Ontario, Michael also came from a troubled family background. By 2009, he exhibited aggressive tendencies and had been accused by at least 13 women of physical violence during intimate encounters, often involving attempts to choke them. Continuing their probe, police decided to question Michael during one of his visits to Terry Lynn, framing their inquiries around her recent activities on the day of Tori's disappearance. Unfortunately, they couldn't gather enough evidence to hold him, so they returned their focus to Terry Lynn, increasing the frequency and intensity of their interrogations. Despite mounting pressure, she remained tight-lipped, leading investigators to a standstill. On April 25, 2009, an international television program aired a special segment on Tori's disappearance, drawing significant public attention. To everyone's surprise, the broadcast struck an emotional chord with Terry Lynn, who, 5 days later on April 30th, broke down and confessed that Tori had died on the same day she was taken. Terry Lynn recounted the grim events, providing chilling details of the crime. She explained that on the morning of April 8th, she and Michael were using substances together when he suggested taking a young girl against her will. He specified that the victim should be a child and goaded Terry Lynn, knowing her vulnerabilities, by challenging her courage and hinting she lacked the nerve. Eager to prove him wrong, Terry Lynn went along with the plan. At around 3:15 p.m., they drove to a school nearby and parked at the back. She got out and waited, watching children as they exited until she spotted Tori. Utilizing the information Tara had shared in their conversations, she approached Tori, introducing herself as a friend of her mother and promising that she had a puppy in her car. Innocent and eager to meet the supposed puppy, Tori trusted her, held her hand, and walked with her to the car, where Michael grabbed Tori and forced her into the vehicle. The pair then drove about 80 miles north, keeping the radio on to monitor for news of Tori's disappearance. Confident they hadn't been detected, they made a couple of stops along the way, first at a gas station and then at a department store. Here, Terry Lynn left Michael with Tori and went inside to buy a hammer, garbage bags, and tape. Afterward, they continued driving to a remote field where Terry Lynn stepped out of the car, knowing what Michael intended to do. According to her account, she turned her back to avoid witnessing the horrors unfolding. However, as Tori's desperate cries echoed from the car, Terry Lynn briefly glanced back and saw the young girl, pleading and crying, reaching out for help. Terry Lynn admitted she knew from the outset what would happen and chose not to intervene, claiming she didn't want to be present for the final moments. This confession not only provided the police with the answers they needed, but also shocked the community, bringing an end to the weeks-long search for Tori Stafford. Back in the car, Michael Rafferty unleashed unimaginable cruelty on Tori Stafford. Afterward, Terry Lynn placed a bag over Tori's head and struck her with a hammer, ending her life. Together they buried her body at the remote location. On the drive back to town, Michael made Terry Lynn numerous promises, that they would always be together and that the police would never catch them. Following Terry Lynn's harrowing confession, Investigators immediately headed to Michael's residence to place him under arrest. During the journey, they discovered a security camera and obtained permission to review its footage. The video was a crucial piece of evidence, capturing the pair on their way to commit the crime. In subsequent interrogations, police managed to extract information about the location where Tori's body had been hidden. A search led them to a wooded area where they found her remains wrapped in garbage bags and secured with tape. On July 20th, the preliminary autopsy report was released, revealing that Tori had suffered multiple hammer-inflicted injuries, with at least 4 blows penetrating her skull, resulting in fatal trauma. She also had 16 fractured ribs and liver damage. However, due to the body's advanced state of decomposition, it was impossible to determine if she had been assaulted in other ways. On July 21, 2009, authorities confirmed publicly that the remains found were indeed those of Tori Stafford. This heartbreaking announcement devastated her family and the community, who had come together in hope throughout the search. A funeral was held for Tori on July 30, 2009, attended by family, friends, and community members who gathered to honor her short but impactful life. The ceremony included heartfelt memories shared by loved ones, and the emotional impact of her case resonated deeply within society. Once the police investigation concluded and all evidence was gathered, the legal proceedings against the 2 accused commenced. Initially, prosecutors considered a joint trial, but eventually decided on separate trials after Terry Lynn pled guilty to first-degree murder. She faced an expedited trial and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for 25 years. In contrast, Michael Rafferty maintained his innocence, refusing to testify and claiming no responsibility. As a result, his trial took place 3 years after Tori's disappearance, involving 62 witnesses and more than 200 pieces of evidence. Michael, now 31, did not testify. Although he admitted to some involvement in Tori's abduction, he denied the charges of murder, kidnapping, and sexual assault. The jury, however, found him guilty on all counts. Following the guilty verdict, Michael Rafferty received a life sentence for the murder of Victoria Stafford, also known as Tori Stafford, with parole eligibility only after 25 years. Additionally, he was given 10 years for kidnapping and sexual assault, to be served concurrently with his life sentence. Even if he were to be released, the judge permanently prohibited him from owning firearms. He was also required to submit a DNA sample to Canada's National Sex Offender Registry. After his sentencing, Michael continued to protest his innocence and even offered to meet with Tori's mother, Tara, ostensibly to fill in the missing pieces. Tara, however, refused any communication with him, stating she could never forgive him. Despite his repeated legal appeals over the years, all attempts to overturn his conviction have been denied. Tori Stafford's tragic story has left an indelible mark on Canadian society, underscoring the importance of child safety, parental responsibility, and the necessity for prompt police response in critical situations. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations. Don't be fooled by images of this young man with a visibly beaten face. The reality is, he has caused a real tragedy. James Lloyd Allen was born in Providence, Rhode Island, USA, on August 29, 1954. He was one of three children born to Lloyd James Allen and Jacqueline Allen, with siblings named Danny and John. The Allens were a typical middle-class family, closely knit and active members of St. Thomas Church. The only out-of-the-ordinary aspect was Lloyd's job. He was a police captain in Providence. As a child, Allen admired his father and the idea of doing things right, though he still found time for some mischief during his school years. Allen is remembered by his family and friends for secretly listening to his favorite baseball team, the Boston Red Sox, on a radio earpiece during class, hoping the nuns wouldn't notice. Growing up with strong values of service, he eventually followed in his father's professional footsteps. His faith also remained a crucial part of his life. By the late 1970s, during weekly prayer meetings at St. Thomas Church, Allen's attention was drawn to a woman named Marge, who was from Bristol and 4 years his senior. Despite the daily demands of his police work, Allen was too shy to approach her. However, fate intervened when Marge was robbed and contacted the police. It turned out her home was in the area Allen patrolled. When responding to the call and finally meeting her, he found himself in a comfortable role. After taking her statement, he made several follow-up visits which led to dating. They married in 1988 at St. Thomas Church. She was 38 and he was 34. Allen and Marge had different personalities, but they shared the same core values and a deep love for each other. This love was the foundation of their wonderful family. They had 2 daughters, Jennifer and Caitlin. Allen wasn't the handiest person around the house, but he was a dedicated dad who adored his daughters more than anything. To support his family, he also worked a second job as a security guard at a supermarket on the east side of the city, which allowed Marge to stay home and take care of their daughters. Their marriage was mostly peaceful. They enjoyed staying in to watch TV or play with their daughters rather than going out. The only real disagreement at home was about baseball, since Marge was a big Yankees fan and she passed that passion on to her daughters. So, whenever they watched games together, there was a bit of a friendly rivalry. As the girls grew up, Marge started working at St. Thomas School. James, on the other hand, was all in on his job in public service, truly embodying what it meant to be an excellent police officer. His co-workers and friends saw him as a man of integrity, with a lot of compassion for crime victims and a knack for solving crimes. His amazing memory and observational skills, along with his resilience and courage, were what made him stand out. He always went the extra mile and was ready to answer calls even in the middle of the night. By 2005, he had become one of the most seasoned detectives in the department, honored with numerous medals, including the Departmental Medal of Honor and the Purple Heart. Known for his signature trench coat, rain or shine, James brought laughter and comfort to Marge and their friends. Meanwhile, Esteban Carpio lived nearby and seemed to be on the wrong side of the law. Born in Boston, Massachusetts on July 30, 1978, to an unknown father, Esteban was raised by his mother, a third-grade teacher. There isn't much known about his early years. As an adult, he worked as a barber and had a history of legal troubles related to substance possession. In the early 2000s, he started a relationship with Samaine Finn. They later had a daughter together. Esteban's behavior started to change for the worse in late 2004. He began acting oddly, claiming to hear voices and believing that a friend had cursed him or used voodoo on him. Whether true or not, his girlfriend took him to a Buddhist temple for help, where a monk tried to protect him by tying a rope around his waist. But it didn't help, and his condition didn't improve, so his mother called for a psychiatric evaluation. The doctors linked his issues to stress and substance abuse, but it's unclear if any steps were taken to address his substance use. The following year, with no improvement in his condition, his mother, Yvonne Carpio, took him back to the hospital. That spring, Esteban crossed paths with Madeline Gata, an 84-year-old active woman who loved her craft of sewing. She had worked as an interior decorator and had created custom designs for various clients. She was also a proud grandmother to 6 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren. On April 16, 2005, after finishing work early in the afternoon, Detective James grabbed a quick bite at a favorite spot before heading home. Meanwhile, Esteban, who was driving nearby, spotted Madeline. Seeing her as an easy target, he quickly got out of his car with a knife. He tried to steal her purse but ended up hurting her with the knife. Her screams alerted people nearby, and one quick-thinking neighbor noted Esteban's car license plate as he ran away. Madeline was taken to a health center where she managed to report what happened. Around 7 in the evening, James's phone rang at home, and he promptly answered. The call was about the attack on the elderly woman and the suspect's clear description, prompting the detective to spring into action. The police team, including James, arrived at Esteban's residence the next day. According to statements from Esteban's family, they warned the officers that Esteban was experiencing a mental crisis, having trouble sleeping, and was not in his right mind. Minutes later, he was taken to the Providence police station for questioning. Once there, he was led to a conference room on the 3rd floor and, as he was not under arrest, his handcuffs were removed. Detective James, assisted by another detective, began the interrogation. James was armed, as per regulation. Initially, Esteban provided a false name, denied any previous arrests, and claimed innocence. When Detective James warned him that he knew his real identity and was aware of his criminal record, Esteban became agitated and asked the other detective for some water. After the other detective left the room, Esteban managed to seize James's gun under unclear circumstances and lock the door from the inside. Timothy, the other detective, later recounted hearing Detective James screaming for help, saying Esteban was going to kill him. Shots were heard, and when they finally broke down the door, they found James dying from 2 fatal wounds, one to the chest and another to the forehead. Esteban had attacked the detective with his own gun and escaped by shooting out a window in an adjoining room, falling onto the grass below. A chaotic scene ensued outside the police headquarters as local, state, and federal officers launched a relentless citywide manhunt for the suspect. Meanwhile, James was rushed to Providence Hospital, but despite all medical efforts, he was declared deceased. Esteban was apprehended after an hour-long search, following a violent confrontation with a taxi driver. His capture was not easy. He was combative and violent. The police officers struck him 3 times in the face. From there, the officers took him to Rhode Island Hospital, where he was administered sedatives and later interviewed. The exchange was captured on a recording that clearly showcased Esteban's distressed voice. At the same time, the doorbell rang at the Allen home. While their daughters slept, Marge went downstairs to find 3 officers at the door. She invited them in, and they delivered the tragic news inside. Marge, stunned, asked where it had happened. Learning it was at the police station, she couldn't believe it. Of all places, that should have been the safest for a police officer. From that moment, her mind struggled to function normally, and the pain hit her hard. The officers called friends of the Allens to stay with the girls and then escorted Marge to the hospital in a patrol car, as only a direct relative could claim the body. She later recounted how the hospital corridors were filled with police officers, all nodding respectfully as she passed. They led her to the trauma room. Her husband lay on the table. The wounds were lethal, yet not visible. On Monday, April 18, 2005, at 10 a.m., a second interview took place at police headquarters. A hysterical Esteban was interrogated again. During the interview, Esteban often rambled, insisting he was insane and unloved. This exchange was also recorded. Meanwhile, the police chief and James's colleagues gathered at the Providence District Court, awaiting Esteban's arraignment. Beyond showing solidarity and affection for their fallen comrade, they wanted to see the man capable of such actions. The tension in the room was palpable as all eyes turned to Esteban, who walked with difficulty, his hands and feet shackled. Several officers escorted him. He had bruises and cuts on his face and wore a white mask covering from his chin to his eyes, making him resemble Hannibal Lecter from The Silence of the Lambs. The moans and screams of his mother and girlfriend soon followed. His mother immediately accused the police of beating her son. Officials struggled to remove both women from the courtroom as they continued to cry out about cover-ups and police brutality. Esteban's face was bleeding and sweating. His eyes were swollen, and his cheeks, forehead, and skull area were severely bruised. His face was marred with multiple bruises and scars. However, such a mask, known as a spit shield, is used by law enforcement when a suspect is injured or combative. Due to Esteban's previous state, the officers decided to take maximum precautions and placed a spit shield on him. They explained that he had injured a leg, an arm, and his head when he jumped out of the window. When accused of murder, he responded by nodding, not denying the crime committed. He only spoke to tell his mother he loved her as he was escorted out of the courtroom. Subsequently, Esteban was detained without bail. Given that the victim was an on-duty police officer, the charge carried a maximum sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. As is common in such cases that shock the public, a press conference led by the police chief was necessary. However, many questions remained unanswered as he did not explain how Esteban managed to seize the officer's gun or the details leading up to the sequence of gunshots. He also did not discuss weapon-carrying protocols within police facilities or associated interrogation procedures, nor did he mention if there were any witnesses. Instead, he expressed heartfelt words for Detective James. James was posthumously promoted to the rank of Detective Sergeant. On April 21, 2005, a sea of police officers and officials accompanied the procession preceding his funeral service. Although it could have been held at the downtown cathedral, Marge chose differently, faithful to the story that had always connected them to St. Thomas Church. The funeral service was held there. After the religious ceremony, James was taken on a 4-mile final journey to St. Anne's Cemetery by a horse-drawn carriage. Marge was moved to see thousands of people, including police officers from across the country, lining the route. Beyond the crime and ensuing mourning, the case of the detective brought to the forefront a long-standing concern: the security in government buildings. Unfortunately, it wasn't the first time such an incident had occurred. For some time, visitors to the Providence Police Building had to pass through a metal detector. What no one had anticipated was that an individual would disarm an officer of his service weapon. In this context, Michael Brady, a police procedures expert and professor at the University in Newport, Rhode Island, mentioned that it was not unusual for a detective to interrogate a suspect while armed. Thus, James was not doing anything different from what police officers do daily across the country. However, the controversy over alleged police abuse against Esteban dominated headlines and online news portals. Later, an investigation by the Federal Bureau of Investigation (FBI) concluded that there was no excessive force by the Providence police, who were compelled to subdue the man due to his violent behavior. It was a special agent from the FBI who presented the report to the press, adding that if the subject resisted the police officers, they were fully justified in using whatever force necessary to subdue him. Despite these claims, Esteban's family continued to insist on the accusations against law enforcement and highlighted Esteban's mental disorder.
It's police brutality. He was mentally ill and he needed help and we couldn't get it. We tried and tried. And he didn't deserve this.
And in fact, his defense team centered their strategy around his mental disturbance. During the trial preparations, Esteban was evaluated by several mental health experts. The defense enlisted a psychiatrist and forensic neuropsychologist. After reviewing Esteban's medical records from hospital visits prior to the incident and listening to tapes of post-arrest interviews, these specialists concluded that the accused suffered from schizophrenic psychosis and an acute onset of paranoid psychosis. The state's evaluation was conducted by neuropsychologist and Professor David Faust and forensic psychiatrist and psychiatry professor Martin Kelly. Insanity defenses are used in a small fraction of U.S. criminal cases and are rarely successful. According to experts in psychiatry and law, jurors might be skeptical that mental illness absolves someone from a crime or fear that a not guilty verdict could ultimately release a dangerous individual back into society. Esteban was charged with assaulting Madeline, the 84-year-old woman, with a knife, as well as the murder of James. The trial began in June 2006. In his opening statement to the jury, the defense attorney acknowledged that the evidence of his client committing the actions was overwhelming. However, the key question for him was whether Esteban was too disturbed to be held fully accountable. One of the first witnesses was a police officer who admitted during his testimony that Esteban had been beaten during the arrest. On June 19th, the accused's mother and his 24-year-old girlfriend testified about Esteban's alarming behavior prior to the incidents. Following their testimonies, 2 doctors took the stand. Both specialists argued that the accused lacked the capacity to commit the crime due to the severe effects of schizophrenia, and thus should not be held fully responsible. The next day, the state countered by presenting Professor David and forensic psychiatrist Martin. Professor David testified that he had examined the results of psychological tests administered to the accused while he awaited trial at the Adult Correctional Institute and concluded that the administration of the test and subsequent results were questionable and that Esteban's responses indicated feigning and malingering. Forensic psychiatrist Martin then testified that, at the time of the crimes, Esteban did not suffer from any mental disease or defect that would have prevented him from understanding the wrongfulness of his actions or conforming his conduct to the requirements of the law. In summary, they described him as manipulative, with a pronounced criminal and antisocial profile. After about 9 hours of deliberation, the jury rejected the insanity defense and delivered their verdict, finding Esteban guilty of first-degree murder of Detective James. He was also found guilty of firing a weapon during a violent crime that resulted in death and of assaulting Madeline with a dangerous weapon. Meanwhile, the cries of Esteban's family members filled the gallery. The court offered to consider a new trial motion after the July 4th holiday, but Esteban's defense attorney emailed the court on July 5, 2006, indicating that no such motion would be filed. The sentencing hearing took place on October 6, 2006. In his first public statement since the trial began, Esteban told the court that his life and health were fine until something happened one day that he could not control. Then, in tears, he apologized to the Allen family for what had occurred.
Every day, I face the facts of what I did and what happened.
The judge then sentenced him to 2 consecutive life sentences, one without the possibility of parole for the crime against James, and an additional consecutive 20-year sentence for the aggravated assault on Madeleine. The judge harshly addressed the defendant, stating that the court had no doubt he was incorrigible. Thus, allowing even the possibility of parole was antithetical in a civilized society. The Attorney General released a statement hours later, praising the judgment as a gesture to honor the memory of one of the best officers of the Providence Police Department. Subsequently, the Rhode Island Supreme Court upheld the convictions and denied the defense's request to reduce the life sentence without parole. As for Madeleine, she recovered without complications. Since James's burial, Marge made it a habit to visit her husband's grave about 4 times a year. She always smiled, remembering that James rested near a cemetery path. After all, watching who passed by was part of his job. She consistently left floral arrangements that included a white rose, with no particular reason for choosing that color, but it became a tradition for the detective's widow. In 2015, on the 10th anniversary of her husband's death, Marge found the courage to consider her first interview. She acknowledged that, for the first 9 years, a physical pain in her chest prevented her from speaking. However, she eventually overcame the pain. During that interview with a reporter, she felt free to criticize the negative press often directed at law enforcement officers. Marge knew firsthand that police work is challenging and involves making difficult decisions. Once she broke her silence, she also addressed the numerous accusations of racism associated with her husband's case. When asked if speaking out would help her find closure, she disagreed with the term, stating there is no closure, just time that always flies by, gradually healing the wounds. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations. That night, Lise Coleman needed a babysitter to look after her 10-month-old son, Travis. Christine Falling, who had experience in babysitting, offered to take care of the baby at her house. The next morning, the little boy was found dead without any evident signs of aggression or violence. However, the police investigation revealed a much darker truth than anyone could have imagined. On March 12, 1963, Christine Falling was born in Perry, Florida, USA. She was the second daughter of a couple who would be considered very unusual today. Her mother, Anne, was a minor, only 16 years old when she had Christine. The eldest daughter, Carol, was born more than a year earlier when Anne was just 14 or 15 years old. To this already dramatic picture was added the significant age difference with Thomas, her father, who was 65 years old. Throughout history, there have been a few uncommon relationships where a large age difference does not matter, and the marriage is very happy. However, this was not the case with Anne and Thomas. A few months after Christine was born, her mother left the house, leaving her and her sister Carol in the care of their father, who worked as a lumberjack and had little to no parenting skills. However, the young mother did not run away forever. She returned home sometime later and was pregnant again. She had more kids over the next 2 years, naming them Michael and Earl. Although the home had 2 girls and 2 boys, Thomas, the husband, claimed that only one of the 4 children was his. It was evident that the family's conditions were neither normal nor stable. The arguments between the mismatched couple grew increasingly frequent, sometimes turning violent. During periods when Anne disappeared, Thomas would take the 4 children to the forest while he worked. The situation was dire for everyone, especially the children. Adding to their difficulties, Thomas suffered a work-related accident that rendered him unable to continue working. One day, Anne made an extreme decision. She took her 4 children, put them in the car, drove to a shopping center, sat them on a bench, and left, never to return. It is not difficult to imagine that the 4 children ended up in the social care system, circulating through orphanages and related institutions. No further information is found about the 2 younger brothers, Michael and Earl. The eldest daughter, Carol, seemed to be a normal child, or at least no contrary references are found. But Christine was a different story. Living in adverse conditions since birth, Christine developed mental problems, intellectual deficits, and exhibited aggressive behavior. Caregivers at the orphanage described her as a compulsive liar and thief, someone who broke rules to get attention. Her relationships with other children and people, in general, were terrible. Everything became more complicated when she began to gain weight uncontrollably and suffer from epilepsy. It is easy to imagine that in an orphanage environment, Christine endured more suffering, becoming the target of mockery, comments, and cruel treatment. However, sometime later, both Christine and Carol had a stroke of luck. They were adopted by a couple, the Fallings, who not only gave them their last name, but also a stable home. The Fallings were a couple who longed to have children, but Dolly Falling couldn't get pregnant. Some accounts suggest that the husband knew the girl's family, which is why they decided to adopt both of them. Unfortunately, although their environment changed, Christine's behavior did not. She was problematic. Her vocabulary and way of speaking were not consistent with her age. She had fits of rage, and she continued a habit she had started in the orphanage, tormenting cats in unimaginable ways. Sometimes she would throw them from great heights to see if it was true that they had 9 lives. She quickly discovered it was false but continued her experiments. Another factor that added tension to the situation was Christine's epilepsy. Life in the Falling household began to turn into a nightmare, not just for the seemingly generous couple, but especially for the adopted girls. According to some sources, the father abused both girls, particularly the older one. This was something the couple always denied, though there are records of 2 arrests of the father for abusing Carol. The first case went to trial, but the jury was divided. The second time, the accusation was made by his own wife Dolly, who later withdrew it. Things were so out of control that the pastor of their church intervened and managed to convince the family to remove the girls from their home. Thus, the sisters were sent to a home in Orlando, where a large group of children, aged between 6 and 21, lived after being removed from their homes due to abuse, neglect, or abandonment. Apparently, this place was more pleasant for Christine, but it did not stop her impulsive, deceitful, aggressive, and cruel behavior, nor her epileptic seizures. After some time, frustrated by their inability to achieve the desired behavior from the sisters, particularly Christine, the authorities decided to remove both girls from the institution. Consequently, they were sent back to the Fallings. From this point on, the intimate abuse seemingly stopped, but the physical violence did not. The final straw was a severe beating the father gave Christine for being 10 minutes late coming home. To make matters worse, The next day, he insisted that she go to school in shorts so everyone could see the marks of his justice. She was not only mistreated but also humiliated. Carol, the eldest, who was approaching 15 years old, decided to find a job to establish her independence. Christine, just over 12 years old, supported her. The day after the beating, both girls ran away from the falling home. With their newfound independence, their world changed, and not for the better. Initially, both sisters went to a friend's house of Carol's. Christine stayed there for a month and a half, but then decided to look for her biological mother in northern Florida. She managed to find her and lived with her for a while. Nearly 2 years later, in 1977, at the age of 14, Christine fell in love with a 20-year-old young man whose name I couldn't confirm, but it was said he was her stepbrother. Shortly after, they got married, but the sudden marriage lasted only 6 weeks, marked by arguments and violent fights. Christine ended up in the hospital twice for injuries sustained during these fights. In one incident, she even threw a heavy outdoor object weighing over 20 pounds at her husband while he slept. The hasty marriage ended even more abruptly. Following this new disaster in her life, Christine, who by then weighed around 200 pounds, began to exhibit new behavior. Over the next 2 years, she visited the emergency room more than 50 times with a long series of strange and varied ailments that doctors couldn't diagnose. She always seemed very nervous, listing symptoms that didn't correspond to any known diseases. In other instances, potential diagnoses were ruled out with medical tests. One time, Christine went to the emergency room claiming a servant had bitten her, but this was proven false. On another occasion, she arrived at the hospital with bleeding from her intimate areas, which turned out to be just her menstruation. Eventually, the doctors reached a possible diagnosis in her case: Munchausen syndrome, a mental disorder in which a person pretends to be ill, creates symptoms, and even inflicts injuries on themselves to attract medical attention, and consequently, the interest of others due to their supposed poor health. Despite all her strange behaviors, significant weight, obvious mental problems, lack of social skills, and unkempt appearance, Christine had a reputation for loving children and being responsible and trustworthy. This led her to earn some money by babysitting for friends and neighbors. At first, everything seemed fine. Her services were appreciated, and as a result, her occasional jobs became more frequent. Things seemed to be finally going well for her. Then came February 25, 1980. On that day, 17-year-old Christine was hired to look after a little girl named Cassidy Johnson. The child was just 2 years old and at a very playful stage of her growth. Her loved ones called her Poncacito and enjoyed her antics. The girl's parents went out to work, collecting worms to sell as fishing bait. But that day, something went terribly wrong. 5 hours after being left alone with Cassidy Johnson, Christine was calling emergency services. She said the little girl had fainted and fallen from her crib. An ambulance was quickly dispatched to take the child to Tallahassee Hospital. The doctors did everything they could to revive Cassidy Johnson, but without success. One of the doctors noticed a strange bump on the child's head. Christine explained that she had lost consciousness and fallen from her crib. Cassidy Johnson was diagnosed with brain inflammation, possibly caused by an infection. Sadly, after being hospitalized for 2 days, she passed away. The Johnsons, the girl's parents, were utterly devastated, and Christine was also deeply saddened. All accounts agree that at least one of the doctors involved in Cassidy Johnson's case had doubts about the cause of the problem. In fact, he suggested that the police be notified of the possibility that there was more to the girl's death than an accident or brain inflammation. At this point in the story, accounts of what happened vary. Some sources claim that the doctor who wanted to notify the authorities was ignored by his colleagues, while others say the police were notified but did not act. It was also said that the doctor wrote a note for the police, but it never reached its destination. Finally, other reports claim that the police did indeed summon the young babysitter. The officers questioned her but found nothing to justify her detention or to warrant a more extensive investigation. What is certain is that the case was never thoroughly investigated, although the autopsy clearly showed that the head injury played a significant role in Cassidy Johnson's death. After the 2-year-old's death, Christine, apparently devastated, decided to move to another city and ended up relocating to Lakeland, Florida. There, she slowly began to work as a babysitter again, demonstrating the same efficiency she had shown in her initial jobs. A year had passed since the death of Cassidy Johnson, and by then, Christine was 18 years old. Some distant relatives asked her to take care of their 4-year-old Jeffrey Davis. Once again, tragedy struck when the boy suddenly stopped breathing for no apparent reason. Christine called emergency services and Jeffrey's parents, but there was nothing they could do. The boy arrived at the hospital already deceased. In this case, as the cause of death was unknown, an autopsy was performed. The doctors concluded that Jeffrey had died from myocarditis, an inflammation of the heart muscle that reduces the heart's ability to pump blood. A virus can cause myocarditis, an adverse reaction to medication, or a general inflammatory condition, which can sometimes lead to sudden death. With this result, no one suspected the babysitter. The parents accepted the doctor's diagnosis of their son's sudden death. Once again, the young caretaker appeared devastated, and this time it wasn't just any death, it was a family member. Just 3 days after Jeffrey's unexpected death, Christine was asked to take care of another child, Joseph Spring, for a few hours. Joseph, a 2-year-old cousin of Jeffrey, needed care while his parents attended Jeffrey's funeral. Incredibly, the tragedy repeated itself. A few hours after leaving Joseph with Christine, the child was dead. Christine claimed she had left the boy sleeping and then heard a scream. When she ran to see what had happened, she found Joseph dead. The health professionals who examined Joseph's body concluded that both Jeffrey and Joseph had died from the same cause, myocarditis caused by an infection. Although no one had concrete evidence or real arguments, rumors began to circulate in the town about the string of coincidences surrounding Christine's babysitting jobs. Even Christine herself started saying that a curse seemed to follow her, bringing death to the children she cared for. The babysitter appeared deeply affected, and everyone knew she had some mental disabilities, but no one really believed she was capable of murdering the children. Consequently, as suddenly as they started, the rumors began to die down. Voices of consolation emerged for young Christine, telling her to calm down and that it was all a series of unfortunate events. Christine gained even more sympathy when she was hospitalized with a viral infection in her digestive system. But this brought a new question. Had she infected the children she was caring for with a virus that proved fatal for them? But very soon, Christine was cleared of the initial suspicions when the doctors found no connection between the virus she had contracted and the one that caused the children's myocarditis. The general conclusion was that bad luck was solely responsible for the deaths. Consequently, Christine was seen almost as a victim. Besides being physically unattractive and mentally underdeveloped, she seemed to be followed by misfortune. Those who knew Christine defended her passionately. They couldn't conceive that she could be responsible for the children's deaths or even capable of harming a child in any way. Additionally, at that time, infant mortality was relatively common in impoverished areas of the cities. After these harsh experiences, Christine decided to move back to her hometown of Perry. On her own initiative, she decided to stop caring for young children. With that decision made, she took the necessary steps to get certified and registered to care for the elderly. Soon, She began working for William Swindle, a 77-year-old man diagnosed with terminal cancer. William lived alone and needed someone to help with household tasks, shopping, cooking, organizing the house, assisting with his needs, and keeping him company. However, the new caregiver didn't even get the chance to prove she could care for the elderly, because on her first day, William passed away. As in so many previous instances, Christine called emergency services, who found the man unconscious on the kitchen floor. He was rushed to the hospital, but he was declared dead upon arrival. Although no autopsy was apparently performed, the cause of death was listed as a massive heart attack. A week later, in the midst of a hot summer, Christine decided to go out with her stepsister Betty Jean Daniels, who was 19 years old. It was July 14, 1981. Christine accompanied Betty to a vaccination center so that Betty's baby, Jennifer Daniels, could receive her immunizations. On the way home, Betty stopped at a store to buy some diapers and left Christine in the car with the 8-month-old baby. When she returned with her purchases, Christine told her that it seemed the baby had suddenly stopped breathing. Initially, the mother was not alarmed. She said that sometimes babies breathe so softly that it's barely noticeable. But when she checked Jennifer, she realized the baby was indeed not breathing, and her skin had a bluish tint. The distressed mother immediately drove to the nearest emergency room, where the baby was declared dead. It was thought to be a case of sudden infant death syndrome, or a rare reaction to the vaccines received. At this point in the story, part of Christine's life goes unaccounted for. There is a period of about a year during which there is no information about her activities. The next reference takes us to July 2, 1982, when Liz Coleman asked Christine to babysit her 10-week-old son, Travis Coleman. It should be noted that other sources claim the baby was 10 months old. Apparently, Travis had been very sick with pneumonia but had recovered. Since he was now perfectly healthy, his parents wanted to go out that night to celebrate the end of that stressful chapter. At that time, Christine was living with her boyfriend, Robert Johnson, in a trailer. She told Mrs. Coleman to bring the baby to her trailer and pick him up the next morning, assuring her she would gladly take care of him for the night. Sadly, as you might imagine, when Liz arrived the next morning to pick up Travis, the baby was dead. Christine appeared shocked and claimed that the last time she saw him alive was at 3 a.m. when she changed his diaper and gave him his prescribed medicine. She said that, at that moment, the baby was fine and soon fell asleep again. Authorities were called, and an autopsy was conducted to determine the cause of death. Initially, it was thought to be a new respiratory problem or a relapse of the pneumonia he had suffered. However, during the post-mortem examination, specialists found internal injuries consistent with mechanical asphyxiation. Meanwhile, Christine was interviewed by a local news outlet about Travis's death. She stated that she had experienced the deaths of 5 children, and although she didn't know what was happening, it was enough to scare her. Travis was Christine's last victim. The medical personnel notified the police that the baby's death was intentional. The police immediately arrested Christine, who soon became known as the babysitter killer. Christine was subjected to police interrogations and evaluated by psychiatric specialists. It wasn't long before the 19-year-old confessed. Christine claimed she heard voices in her head telling her, "Kill the baby, kill the baby," which wouldn't stop until she did it. She also gave some personal reasons for committing the murders. Her account was both sad and chilling. Referring to her first victim, Cassidy Johnson, Christine said they had been playing outside, and the girl was very agitated. When it was 8 o'clock and the child wouldn't calm down, she suffocated her until she stopped breathing and turned purple. Her heart had stopped, her pulse was gone, and she wasn't breathing. Christine tried to resuscitate her but couldn't. Regarding the case of Jennifer, Christine explained that the little girl was constantly crying, which drove her crazy. so she put her hands around her neck and squeezed until she stopped. About what happened with Travis, Christine said the baby was sleeping and she just smothered him for no reason. She continued to give gruesome details, telling authorities that she copied the method from something she saw on television, but added her own touches. She described it as an easy and simple method. After adding that she killed them without knowing why, she explained that she would place a blanket over their mouth and nose and press until they stopped moving, ensuring no one could hear them scream. When she learned she could be sentenced to death in the electric chair, Christine pleaded guilty to the 3 described murders. She claimed she had nothing to do with the others. Authorities were confident that the other 3 victims were also killed by her, but by then, it would have been very difficult to prove, so they decided to leave it at that. In late 1982, Christine Falling was sentenced to 3 concurrent life sentences, with the possibility of parole after serving 25 years. 3 years after entering prison, Christine also confessed to the murder of William Swindle, the 77-year-old patient who lived only a few hours after being placed in her care. In prison and over the years, specialists have stated that Christine did not actually hear voices in her head. Behind bars, she returned to her old habit of claiming to suffer from numerous and strange illnesses, frequently visiting the doctor. Officially, Munchausen syndrome was never diagnosed, but when she had her first opportunity to apply for parole in 2007, a mental health specialist said he believed she indeed suffered from the syndrome and consequently posed a danger to the public. No one came forward to speak on Christine's behalf, and her early release was denied. She had another opportunity before the parole board in 2017, but again, her request was denied. According to one source, her case could be reviewed again in 2024, while Christine continues serving her sentence at Lowell Correctional Institution in Ocala, Florida. Before concluding, it's worth noting that besides the children mentioned in this case, there were reportedly 3 others whom Christine may have also tried to kill, but fortunately, she did not succeed. Leading the list is a 3-year-old named Kylie Summerling, who became seriously ill while in Christine's care. The child was diagnosed with meningitis, but thankfully survived. The other 2 were brothers Charles and Jeffrey Hale, aged 3 years and 14 months respectively. Both also became seriously ill while under Christine's care and required hospitalization, though the details were not specified. The Hale brothers were lucky and recovered from their illnesses. Today, working parents who must leave their children in the care of babysitters have tools to monitor what happens in their homes while they're away. Security cameras and even apps that allow real-time viewing of what happens at home are measures available to protect children from potential abuse by caregivers. However, things were very different in the 1980s. In the book Murder in America, someone once asked Christine what she would like to do if granted freedom, and she said she would love to return to babysitting because she claimed to love children to death. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations. On the afternoon of April 23, 2006, a tragic scene was uncovered in a quiet home. Mark Richardson, age 42, and his wife Deborah, age 48, were found deceased in their basement. Upstairs, their 8-year-old son, Tyler Jacob, was also found lifeless. Alarmingly, the couple's 12-year-old daughter, Jasmine, was not found at the scene, sparking immediate fears for her safety. However, as the investigation unfolded, it became apparent that the circumstances were far more sinister than anyone initially suspected. Today's story is set in Medicine Hat, a small city about 200 miles southeast of Calgary, known as Canada's sunniest spot. It's a lively town favored by young, outdoorsy families, offering plenty of natural beauty and activities. The Richardson family enjoyed all the perks of life here. Deborah and Mark Richardson, along with their children, 8-year-old Tyler and 12-year-old Jasmine, represented a typical family unit. Deborah and Mark originally met in 1990 at a gym in Ontario where they both attended classes, including one for substance abuse recovery. They had conquered their past addictions by the time they met, and after moving to Medicine Hat, they started their family with Jasmine, followed by Tyler 4 years later. Their life in Medicine Hat was peaceful. Their home was modest, and both children were thriving and healthy. Jasmine, especially, was doing well in school and was known as an honor student at just 11 years old. She was cheerful, pretty, and had a contagious smile, much like her mother. However, as Jasmine entered her teenage years, her personality began to shift, a common scenario for many teens. Although she started this phase as a happy, church-going student, her demeanor changed dramatically when she discovered the internet. While she continued to be bubbly and friendly in person, online she adopted a completely different persona. Jasmine became active on social media platforms like MySpace, where her profile gradually shifted from light and girly to a darker, gothic theme. She also joined Vampire Freaks, a site aimed at connecting those interested in goth, punk, and emo subcultures. Her profile showcased her in thick eyeliner, alternative clothes, and posing with prop guns. Jasmine's social media profiles were a clear window into her teenage interests: piercings, tattoos, Tim Burton movies, toy guns, and loud music were all the rage among emo teens in the mid-2000s. She used a made-up name and claimed she was 15. She liked talking to older people, trying to seem as mature as they were. Her parents did their best to help her through these tough changes by suggesting they spend more time together and find activities they could all enjoy. But Jasmine wasn't interested. She saw her younger brother Tyler as a bother and hardly spoke to him anymore. Jasmine could spend hours at her computer, chatting with people she'd never met in person. Her parents, Deborah and Mark, believed this was just a phase. They thought she would eventually grow out of it and become more sensible. So they were pretty lenient about her new interests. She regularly attended local music shows that catered to the younger crowd. Jasmine, only 12, would typically go to these events with a group of her friends. However, it was at one of these punk rock concerts that things began to take a troubling turn. At this show, Jasmine met a 23-year-old named Jeremy Steinke. Jeremy was a troubled individual. He had dropped out of high school after enduring severe bullying and had since refused to seek employment. Instead, he lived in a trailer park with his mother, who struggled with alcoholism and had unstable relationships, leading to a revolving door of men in their home. These men were often abusive towards Jeremy, adding to his difficult circumstances. Jeremy had a tough life, often facing physical abuse from his mother's boyfriends. At 23 years old in 2006, he was without a job and spent most of his time chatting online with much younger girls. Jeremy saw himself as a bit of an oddball, a view that his friends agreed with, especially when he shared some strange facts about himself. For instance, Jeremy claimed to enjoy the taste of blood and said he drank it regularly. He even carried a vial of blood around his neck for whenever he felt the urge to indulge in this unusual craving. Jeremy also had a peculiar claim that he was a 300-year-old werewolf. This strange assertion left many skeptical, especially because Medicine Hat had seen many full moons without any incidents, leading some to dismiss his claim as nonsense. Jasmine first encountered Jeremy at a local punk rock concert where she falsely told him she was 15, though she was really just 12 years old. Despite the age difference, this did not seem to bother Jeremy, who had a preference for younger girls because he found them easier to influence and control. They started exchanging messages across various social media platforms. As the months passed, Jeremy and Jasmine's conversations became more frequent and intense. Jeremy's alternative lifestyle and interests began to shape Jasmine, pushing their chats into a disturbingly romantic direction. Influenced by Jeremy, Jasmine started to embrace a darker, gothic lifestyle. Jeremy's declaration of love was extreme. He gave Jasmine a vial of his own blood, similar to one he wore. This relationship soon became known to Jasmine's parents, who were understandably shocked and worried upon discovering her involvement with an older man. They promptly grounded her and confiscated her computer to cut off communication. To help Jasmine break away from what they saw as a harmful relationship, they decided to seek the help of a psychologist. They truly believed that counseling would repair and strengthen their bond with their daughter. To their relief, it seemed to work. Jasmine appeared to be cooperating and moving back towards a more normal life. She promised her past behaviors were behind her, and so her parents gave her computer back. This decision, however, would tragically lead to their undoing. But did Jasmine cut ties with Jeremy? Not at all. They soon reconnected, this time more secretive than before. Jeremy was infuriated by her parents' interference, expressing his anger through dark, aggressive poetry. He even fantasized about dramatic and violent actions against her parents, echoing a disturbingly romantic notion of eliminating obstacles to their relationship. Jasmine, perhaps influenced by Jeremy's intense emotions, also expressed extreme sentiments in her messages, joking about drastic actions against her own parents to be with Jeremy. While it's common for teenagers to express frustration with their parents, the context here was far more serious, given Jeremy's manipulative nature and his influence over Jasmine. This situation was not just teenage melodrama. It was being shaped by Jeremy's dark fantasies, blurring the line between jest and potential reality. The Richardson family continued their daily lives, seemingly content. Mark and Deborah were relieved to see their daughter Jasmine showing signs of improvement, and their son Tyler was enjoying his carefree childhood as a cheerful 8-year-old. Unknown to them, a sinister plan was being formed behind a computer screen, with Jasmine involved in plotting against her own family. Jasmine often complained to her friends about how much her parents annoyed her, expressing a desire to end their lives, but nobody took her seriously. On the night of Saturday, April 22, 2006, as Mrs. Richardson was getting ready for bed, she heard a noise in the basement and thought it might be rats. She went downstairs to check, flipped on the light, and to her shock, saw a person in a ski mask standing there. She screamed in fright, and the masked person rushed at her, trying to silence her. Despite his efforts, Deborah fought back, screaming even louder. The attacker then stabbed her repeatedly with a knife. Hearing his wife's screams, Mark grabbed the nearest thing he could find, a screwdriver he had left out from fixing an outlet earlier that day, and ran to the basement. He arrived to find his wife in a pool of blood and confronted the attacker, only to be stabbed in the stomach and then multiple times more. As he lay dying, Mark asked, "Why?" The attacker coldly responded, "Because your daughter wished it." Upstairs, their young son Tyler was left alone, sitting on his bed in his pajamas, too scared to move as he heard the footsteps approaching his room. The door then slowly opened. The next day, on a calm Sunday, April 23, 2006, the neighborhood was quiet, with families engaged in their usual weekend activities. It was a typical Sunday with children playing outside, including a boy who decided to visit his friend Tyler. However, when he knocked on the door of the Richardsons' home, no one answered, even though their car was parked in the driveway. Puzzled, the boy peeked through a basement window and was startled to see a motionless figure on the floor. Alarmed, he rushed home to inform his mother, who promptly called the police. The police arrived to find the door unlocked and the house disturbingly quiet. Their investigation began in the basement, where they discovered the lifeless bodies of Deborah and Mark Richardson in a gruesome scene, surrounded by pools of their own blood. Deborah had been stabbed 12 times in the chest, and Mark had suffered 24 wounds to his chest and back. The tragedy extended further as the police found Tyler's body in his bedroom, surrounded by blood-soaked toys, with multiple stab wounds and his throat cut. As the officers surveyed the scene, family photos hinted at a missing member, Jasmine. Initially, it seemed like a brutal home invasion, possibly involving Jasmine's abduction. An Amber Alert was issued for the missing girl as police started to investigate, beginning with her school and friends. A shocking discovery came when they accessed Jasmine's school locker. Among her belongings, they found a disturbing stick figure drawing depicting a family walk that ends in horror. The sketch showed one family member retrieving gasoline from a truck, dousing the others and setting them on fire. This grim drawing suggested a very different narrative from an abduction, hinting at Jasmine's involvement in the tragedy. When authorities found the chilling drawing in Jasmine's locker, they began to view her disappearance with suspicion, suspecting that she might be involved in her family's murder. Prompted by Jasmine's friends, who revealed Jeremy's affection for Jasmine and disturbing remarks about harming her parents, police quickly started looking also for Jeremy. These leads, coupled with a slew of digital evidence from messages, emails, and chat logs, helped investigators piece together a grim motive. Soon, the story of the suspected killer couple was making headlines, shocking and horrifying the Medicine Hat community. Detectives turned to the media to help find Jasmine, hoping she would make contact or that someone would provide information that could lead to her. Due to her age, Canadian law prohibited the media from publishing Jasmine's real name, so news agencies started referring to her simply as JR. However, police uncovered that a few hours after the crime, Jasmine and Jeremy were seen at a restaurant and later at a party hosted by an acquaintance. Witnesses at the party noted that Jasmine seemed normal, showing no signs of abduction or shock. She was seen drinking and enjoying herself. When questioned by friends about how they managed to escape from her parents, Jasmine laughed and remarked, "Jeremy and I just took care of them," to which Jeremy added, "I carved them up like fish." The party guests thought this was a dark joke, not realizing the truth in their words. Their infamy led to their downfall. Within 24 hours of the murders, they were spotted in the community of Leader, Saskatchewan, about 100 miles from Medicine Hat. Police found them sleeping in a pickup truck and arrested them without resistance. Despite their arrest, Jasmine and Jeremy seemed indifferent, showing more annoyance than remorse. During interrogation, their apparent unity crumbled. Jeremy confessed that Jasmine had implored him to eliminate her parents, promising to do anything for her. In turn, Jasmine pinned the blame solely on Jeremy, claiming her previous talks of killing her family were just jokes and she never intended any real harm. However, Jeremy's version aligned more convincingly with the extensive digital evidence, suggesting that both had actively participated in the planning and execution of the crime. The burning question was, what exactly was their plan? On the night of April 22nd, Jasmine stealthily let Jeremy into her house. She then went upstairs as Jeremy headed to the basement. There, he confronted Deborah and brutally attacked her with a folding knife. The noise woke Mark, who rushed to help his wife, only to find himself in a deadly struggle. Mark dashed towards the basement upon hearing a disturbance, only to discover his wife on the floor with a masked man looming over her. A struggle ensued as Mark attempted to wrestle the knife away from the intruder, but tragically, he was overpowered and sustained multiple stab wounds to his chest and back. As he lay fading, he managed to ask the assailant why, to which the chilling reply was, "Because your daughter wanted it that way." Mark succumbed to his injuries shortly thereafter. While this grim scene unfolded downstairs, Jasmine was upstairs, supposedly tasked with killing her younger brother Tyler, who was peacefully asleep. The accounts of what happened next vary significantly between Jasmine and Jeremy. Jeremy asserted that Jasmine had acted alone in killing Tyler. Jasmine, on the other hand, claimed she initially hesitated, and it was Jeremy who urged her to go through with it. She admitted to stabbing Tyler, albeit reluctantly, which she described as weakly. However, evidence showed that Tyler had been stabbed 5 times, including a severe laceration to his throat. After the murders, Jeremy left the scene, leaving Jasmine alone in the house with the bodies of her family. She then took a taxi to Jeremy's trailer, escaping the horrific scene she had left behind. During the trial, a taxi driver testified about picking up Jasmine shortly after the murders. Remarkably, she appeared calm and greeted him cheerfully, showing no signs of distress despite the recent loss of her entire family. After being picked up, Jasmine reunited with Jeremy, and the two spent the next 24 hours together, seemingly unaffected by the gravity of their actions. They were observed being affectionate in public, even visiting friends and boastfully discussing what they had done. Their lack of remorse extended even after their arrest. Interestingly, authorities allowed them to exchange letters, possibly hoping to gather more evidence from their communications. In these letters, Jeremy proposed to Jasmine, and she accepted, further demonstrating their disconnect from the severity of their situation and the normal responses expected under such circumstances. After Jasmine claimed that Jeremy was solely responsible for the murders, the pair faced their trials a year later, in June 2007. Jeremy, being an adult, was subjected to the full extent of the law. His defense painted him as a psychologically weak individual with low self-esteem, blaming his violent actions on a history of abuse from his mother's lovers and a desperate craving for affection. They argued that he sought Jasmine's love to fill the emotional void from his troubled childhood, a sentiment echoed by his friends who said he would do anything for her affection. Nonetheless, such explanations did not excuse the heinous nature of his crimes, and Jeremy was sentenced to 3 life terms, with a possibility of parole after 25 years. Jasmine, referred to as JR in court due to her age, was also found guilty of murdering her family. The digital evidence and her behavior before and after the murders painted a clear picture of her involvement. Her lack of remorse was striking, especially when she was observed smiling while recounting the events of her family's deaths during her testimony. However, because she was a minor at the time of the crimes, the harshest sentence she could receive under Canadian law was 10 years, which included psychiatric care and monitored living in a community setting rather than traditional incarceration. This lighter sentence reflects the complexities of dealing with young offenders, even those involved in grave crimes. During her incarceration, Jasmine was often cited as a model of successful rehabilitation. Through therapy and severing ties with Jeremy, she began to show genuine remorse for her actions, convincing the authorities responsible for her rehabilitation that she was unlikely to reoffend. The person in charge of her expressed hope for her transformation, suggesting that her family, had they survived, might have been proud of her progress. He reminded her that while the past cannot be changed, she has control over her daily actions and behavior. In the last 5 years of her sentence, Jasmine studied under a new identity to help her reintegrate into society. She was released in 2016 and has since lived anonymously among the public. Meanwhile, Jeremy remains incarcerated, a situation many deem appropriate considering his predatory behavior prior to the murders. The debate over Jasmine's sentencing remains contentious. Some argue that if someone is old enough to commit a crime, they should face the full consequences, while others believe that Jasmine, who was only 12 at the time and manipulated by an older man, deserved a chance for rehabilitation. After maintaining a clean record for 5 years following her release, Jasmine's criminal record was expunged, allowing her a fresh start without the burden of her past crimes. Mark and Deborah Richardson are remembered as caring parents. The complexity of Jasmine's case raises difficult questions about justice, punishment, and rehabilitation, especially considering her age and the influence exerted by an older individual. While 10 years may seem short given the severity of the crime, the circumstances of her age and manipulation add layers of complexity to the discussion of her case. Canada's judicial approach often emphasizes rehabilitation over strict punishment, which sets it apart from places like the U.S., where the focus might lean more towards punitive measures. This philosophy raises complex questions, especially in cases like Jasmine's. Despite being only 12 years old when she committed her crimes, the severity of her actions, killing her entire family, is undeniable. This leads to a significant debate. Can someone who has committed such grave acts be fully reformed and trusted once released? And with that, we end today's Unreal True Crime. Don't forget to subscribe and hit like if you appreciate my work. Until next time. In the early hours of July 16, 2010, in the usually quiet town of Pico Truncado, a shocking event occurred. The body of Johanna Casas, a 20-year-old model and former beauty queen of the town, was found in a deserted area. She had been killed by 2 gunshot wounds. The prime suspects in the murder were Marcos Diaz, her partner until the day of the murder, and Victor Cingolani, her ex-boyfriend. But the story would soon take an even darker turn. Johanna Casas was born in Pico Truncado, a small town in the northern part of Santa Cruz province in Argentina. The town got its name from a nearby hill with a flat top. From there, you can see the oil wells, which are the main industry in the area. Though her exact birth date isn't officially recorded, family social media posts and news reports suggest she was born on July 19, 1990. Johanna wasn't the only baby to arrive that day. 15 minutes after she was born, her twin sister Edith was born. They are the oldest daughters of Marcelina del Carmen Orellana and Valentin Casas, who also had another child. Valentin, a police officer, eventually split from Marcelina, but he stayed very involved in his kids' lives. The twins looked incredibly alike. They had the same face, build, and even sounded similar. They even shared part of their names, as their parents named the younger twin Edith Johanna. They were so similar that their mom would sometimes mix them up, even changing the same baby's diaper twice. The sisters shared a special twin bond. Edith once said that they could feel when something was happening to the other. For instance, when Edith was 11, she had an accident while with her mom in another city nearby. She was in a coma for a few days, and when she woke up, she kept asking for Johanna. Valentin told her that Johanna, who was with him back in their hometown, felt like Edith was calling her. As they grew up, the twins became beautiful young women with very different personalities. Edith was quieter and more reserved, while Johanna was outgoing and liked fashion and makeup. This interest in fashion led Johanna to start a modeling career. She even participated in fashion shows and traveled to bigger cities like Bahia Blanca, where she was once crowned the beauty queen of Pico Truncado. In mid-2006, when Johanna was just 15, she met a local young man named Victor Cingolani, who was 21 at the time. They met one afternoon at the town bingo hall, where Johanna was with her dad and brother. Victor was at another table with his mom and a friend. Later, he mentioned noticing Johanna looking his way quite a bit. Victor had a reputation around town for being quite the charmer and a ladies' man. He worked long hours at the oil company and spent his free time out with friends, often choosing local brothels over bars. He boasted about being with over 40 women who came to him effortlessly. That day at the bingo, after they exchanged looks, Victor felt sure he could start something with her. He said that Johanna made the first move by coming over and giving him a note with her name and phone number on it. He texted her right away and they started talking. They went out a few times and soon made their relationship official. Marcelina, despite the age difference between Johanna and Victor, was okay with their relationship. She preferred this to her daughter randomly hanging out with others. They were together for about a year and a half. Over time, Johanna's parents noticed Victor's aggressive behavior toward her. There was an incident where Victor, trying to hit Johanna, accidentally broke a window and injured his hand instead. Things got even more complicated when Victor and Johanna broke up, and he started seeing Edith. Victor said his feelings for her grew over time, and he was never romantically involved with both sisters simultaneously. While he was with Johanna, Edith was dating another guy, and sometimes the four of them went out together. There were also times when Victor asked Johanna out, and Edith joined because she was home alone. Victor was drawn to Edith's quieter, more reserved nature. She was just as lovely as her sister, but simpler. Even after his relationship with Johanna ended, he kept in touch with Edith. Eventually, they admitted their feelings for each other, but Edith wanted to talk to Johanna about it first. Johanna told her sister they were adults and knew what they were doing, so she didn't oppose their relationship. However, the twins' close bond changed. When Edith started dating Victor, the friends they shared began to drift apart and each sister formed her own group. Victor and Edith eventually broke up, and Victor moved on to another local woman. Both sisters continued to have complicated relationships after Victor. When Victor ended another relationship 2 years later, he reached out to Johanna again. She was with someone else at the time, but quickly ended that relationship to get back with Victor. This reunion was brief, ending after 2 months because Johanna wanted children, which Victor did not. Afterward, Johanna started seeing a man named Marcos Diaz, who was disliked by her parents. The Diaz family was surrounded by rumors, including a serious allegation that one of Marcos's brothers had killed his own child. Marcos had a violent reputation and was possessive and controlling. He was overly jealous, constantly messaging Johanna and not allowing her to go out alone. Despite these red flags, they moved in together after just 6 months of dating. During this period, Victor rekindled his relationship with Edith, admitting he had never gotten over their breakup. This back and forth between the sisters would culminate in a series of dramatic, tragic, and scandalous events. On July 15, 2010, 4 days before their 19th birthday, Johanna went out partying with Marcos until about 3 in the morning. She was last seen alive as they left the party venue together. Early the next morning, a local dog walker discovered Johanna's lifeless body in an open field about 3 miles from the town center. The area, known as the forest belt of Pico Truncado, soon became the focus of intense police activity as news spread that one of the Casas twins had died. The autopsy later revealed that Johanna had been shot at close range in the heart and between the second and third ribs. Within hours of the discovery, police arrested Victor and Marcos as the main suspects in the crime, given their relationships with the victim. Investigators suspected that the murder was a planned act by both men, theorizing that Johanna wanted to end her relationship with Marcos, and the men decided that if she would not be with them, then she would not be with anyone. Marcos was released a week later due to a lack of evidence, despite having been the last person seen with Johanna the night before. Shortly after, authorities found DNA on a cigarette butt at the scene where Johanna was killed. Unfortunately, by that time, Marcos had fled, and it would be over 6 months before he was captured and subsequently placed in pre-trial detention. Meanwhile, Victor remained in custody, charged with the murder of his ex-girlfriend. However, he consistently maintained his innocence. According to his statements, on the morning of July 16th, he had been at the casino and then at a friend's house until 6 a.m. Surprisingly, his arrest and subsequent charges did not completely sever his relationship with Edith. Victor later recounted that on his first night in prison, he asked for a phone to call Edith and tell her he had nothing to do with her sister's death. He also wanted to express his longing to see her again. However, Edith hung up as soon as she recognized his voice, then changed her number, and he was unable to contact her again. Victor, trying to see Edith again, asked to be taken to the hospital, claiming he had a headache. On the way, he saw Edith walking hand in hand with another man, suggesting their intense relationship had ended. Edith later shared that she was going through a tough time. She was mourning her twin, the closest person to her, and dealing with her own inner turmoil. She felt ignored and over-medicated. 2 years after Johanna's death, in mid-2012, Victor stood trial for her murder, facing charges that painted him as abusive and controlling. The prosecution's case was built on 3 main pieces of evidence. The first was the paraffin test, done on Victor's hands right after his arrest, which detected gunpowder. The second was evidence from tracking dogs that placed him at the crime scene. Lastly, Victor's alibi failed as he couldn't confirm his whereabouts during the crime. Victor's lawyer pushed back, asking the higher court to throw out the evidence due to severe investigative errors, including a supposed audio recording of the judge of the case acknowledging mistakes by the inexperienced local police. Despite these challenges, the trial began on June 18, 2012. The prosecutor sought a 20-year sentence due to the alleged use of a firearm, while another suggested 15 years, and Victor's defense argued for his complete acquittal. Victor decided not to testify. The courtroom heard from various witnesses. Johanna's father accused Victor of past violent behaviors and threats towards his daughter, recounting a time he overheard Victor on a speakerphone call threatening Johanna. A woman who lived near the crime scene mentioned her son was the only one home that night and noted the delayed police response. The person who found Johanna testified that he saw no blood at the scene. Another witness spoke about Victor's complicated relationships with the twins, suggesting he saw Edith as a substitute for Johanna. Edith herself took the stand, having attended every day of the trial wearing a t-shirt demanding justice for her sister. She testified that Victor was physically abusive towards both her and Johanna, and claimed that he had coerced them into intimate relations. Finally, she stated that she believed Victor had played a role in Johanna's death, calling him a psychopath. The hearings concluded, and on June 27, 2012, Victor was sentenced to 13 years in prison for simple homicide. However, the controversy surrounding the case was far from over. Despite his conviction for Johanna's murder and the serious allegations against him, Edith later shocked everyone by announcing that she was back in a relationship with Victor. It remained unclear how this reconciled relationship came about, but at some point, Edith became convinced of Victor's innocence and believed that the real perpetrator of the crime against her twin sister was Marcos, who was in pre-trial detention awaiting his trial. When asked about her sworn testimony, Edith claimed she had been pressured by her parents to make those accusations. Regarding the evidence presented by the prosecution, Edith sided with the defense. Just as Victor's lawyer had argued during the trial, there was never any conclusive evidence placing Victor at the crime scene. He also highlighted issues with the paraffin test, noting that it was conducted without expert witnesses present, and the officer in charge didn't wear gloves and used his teeth to cut the tape. Furthermore, Victor was found to have the highest concentration of gunpowder on his right hand. He explained this by saying he had been in his brother-in-law's truck, who often went hunting and sometimes left bullets on the seats. Regarding the tracking dogs, the defense stated that 2 of them had yielded negative results, with only 1 dog indicating a positive result, and there were no witnesses to corroborate this. They also argued that a person's scent could linger at a scene for up to a month. Victor claimed the entire trial was rigged, suggesting that in Santa Cruz, anyone could be convicted just to satisfy the victim's family's demands. While in prison, Victor took up carpentry, stating that Johanna's death had transformed him, leading him to abandon his partying and drinking habits. Meanwhile, Edith had moved in with Claudia, Victor's sister, possibly due to estrangement from her own family when she decided to reconcile with the man convicted of her twin's murder. Together, they sold chairs, stools, tables, magazine racks, portraits, and paintings that Victor made in prison. With the proceeds, he bought a pair of rings. During a prison visit, Victor proposed to Edith, and she accepted. As expected, Edith's engagement to the man imprisoned for killing her sister was devastating news for the twins' parents, who could not comprehend what was happening. For them, Victor had murdered one daughter and was destroying the other. At that point, Marcelina declared that it was as if Edith had also died. Since moving in with her sister-in-law, Edith had barely seen her family. She believed they had brainwashed her daughter and that Claudia never left her alone for a second. When the engagement was announced, Edith's family filed a legal injunction to try to prevent the marriage, claiming that the 23-year-old was mentally unstable and fearing for her safety. The wedding was originally scheduled for December 5, 2012, when Victor had only served about 6 months of his sentence. However, the injunction delayed the ceremony. Despite this, Edith showed no signs of psychological or mental dysfunction that would prevent her from getting married. On February 14, 2013, Victor and Edith tied the knot amid widespread disapproval. Their story, a woman marrying the man accused of murdering her twin sister, grabbed headlines worldwide. An Argentine journalist known for his bold reporting style won the exclusive coverage with a bid of $1,500. Journalists from countries like Germany and the USA flocked to their small town, and big media outlets like the BBC and Daily Mail covered the story. Edith even got offers from Playboy magazine and was invited to join Argentina's top TV show, Dancing for a Dream, but she turned them all down. On their wedding day, just before noon, the couple headed to the civil registry office in Pico Truncado, heavily guarded due to the controversy. Chaos broke out when Victor, still incarcerated, arrived in a prison transport. The crowd became unruly, throwing punches, stones, eggs, and tomatoes, and shouting insults. The vehicle and the registry's doors were damaged, making the wedding front-page news. Despite the chaos, Edith and Victor declared their love and plans to start a family. Yet, the legal battle over Johanna Casas's murder was far from over. On June 4, 2013, the trial began for Marcos Diaz, who had been held at the Pico Trincado police station. Charged initially as an accessory, Marcos was described in court documents as violent and controlling, known for harassing his girlfriends and often involved in armed fights. His unexplained trip the day after Johanna's murder was seen as an escape attempt, and he stopped texting Johanna right after her supposed time of death, suggesting he knew she was gone. This contrasted sharply with his frequent texts to her the day before. DNA from a cigarette butt and a music CD linked to Marcos found near Johanna's body were key pieces of evidence against him. During the trial, Edith, supporting Victor, tearfully accused Marcos of killing her sister. Valentin, the twins' father, also testified, recalling the last time he saw Johanna with Marcos and describing Marcos as a dangerous man involved in cult-like activities, often seen causing trouble at the cemetery. Marcelina, for her part, described the accused as obsessive over her daughter. He never let her be alone, not even to attend family parties. However, the proceedings took an unexpected turn when prosecutor expanded the accusations. He posited that Marcos was the actual perpetrator of Johanna's murder and the only one present at the scene when her life was taken. As a result, on July 2, 2013, the court sentenced Marcos Diaz to 12 years in prison for the homicide of Johanna. At this point, two individuals were convicted for the same crime, each found guilty by different courts. Following the verdict, Marcos expressed dissatisfaction with the sentence, reasserted his innocence, and claimed he was convicted because there was no one else to investigate. On the other hand, Edith expressed relief and happiness that justice had finally been served. Meanwhile, the twins' mother chose not to speak to the media, while their father expressed his disagreement with the ruling. Victor's lawyer announced plans to seek his immediate release, asserting that they had always maintained his innocence. If the evidence indeed confirmed that Marcos was the only one at the crime scene, his client would be released immediately. Ultimately, on December 5, 2013, the Higher Court of Justice announced the release of Victor due to insufficient evidence to convict him. After his release, Victor sought compensation from the state, requesting $75,000 for his wrongful imprisonment. However, he received no payment. Over time, Marcelina began to reassess her view of the events and ultimately accepted that Victor had not been involved in Johanna's murder. Although the marriage between Edith and Victor lasted several years, by 2021 it was known that they had separated. She was living with a new partner and was expecting her first child, while he had rebuilt his life with another woman. After more than 2 decades of tangled romantic relationships, a brutal crime, and a couple of equally controversial trials, the case of Johanna Casas seemed to have finally reached a conclusion. Nevertheless, to this day, there are still those who debate the facts and continue to question whether Victor was truly innocent of the events of July 16, 2010, or if he managed to escape unpunished from one of Argentina's most sensational crimes. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.